This is the story of the Pלמח, the strike force of the Haganah, a Jewish fighting underground under the sole authority of the Jewish Yeshuv's elected institutions. The Pלמח was a recruited youth movement whose training was financed by work in the kibbutzim, which also served as their bases. In those days, the Pלמח was a barefoot army with neither uniforms nor standard weapons, children of the underground. The Pלמח was founded in May 1941. The Nazis were at the gates of the country and the Pלמח was preparing for sabotage operations behind enemy lines. What's more, its paratroopers had already been dropped into occupied Europe. The free world celebrates its victory over Hitler. While the masses dance in the streets and public squares, the Jewish people faces the loss of millions of its brethren, murdered in the Holocaust. Those who survived wished to leave the cursed soil of Europe for their one and only refuge, Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. The white paper of the British Mandate stood between them and their hopes. It meant no immigration and no settlements. The Pלמח undertook its most important task to date, getting the survivors to Eretz Israel. In spite of a British blockade, some 85,000 illegal immigrants arrive on dilapidated ships from Europe and North Africa. Thousands more come from Middle Eastern countries by land. Exodus was considered the flagship of illegal immigration. Its heroism in the face of adversity aroused the entire world against the British government. When once again Jews were sent back to Germany, the world's conscience could not bear the disgrace. The struggle against the mandate turned violent. The Pڵmach freed illegal immigrants from the British-run athlete detention camp, blew up radar stations, railways, police stations, bridges, and deportation ships. The British retaliated with mass arrests and countrywide searches for weapons. Hundreds of Pڵmach members were incarcerated, but Israel's independence was drawing nearer. The UN resolution on the establishment of a Jewish state caused an outburst of joy around the country. The last merrymakers that night met the first casualties at dawn. The Arab countries attack Israel on the day of its birth. Regular trained armies coupled with armed gangs try to shatter the Zionist dream. Under the command of Yitzhak Sadeh, Yigal Allon, and Yitzhak Rabin, the Pڵmach was trained to become the fighting force defending the country. They were armed primarily with courage. The young and experienced members would go on to become the infrastructure of the Israel Defense Forces. The Arabs surround Jerusalem. Conditions in the besieged city deteriorate. Fear and destruction prevail and famine spreads. Even artillery shelling does not deter people from waiting in line for water. Pڵmach convoys are Jerusalem's only hope. Time and again they try to break through with food and reinforcements for the city. The Harel Brigade of the Pڵmach, under the command of Yitzhak Rabin, forges on, undaunted, rock after rock, toward Jerusalem. I was given a platoon of youngsters as reinforcements. I remember it was one of my most difficult moments of the war. They were 16 years old. As they were coming up, an onslaught of shelling hit us. And these kids, I think half of them were hit. I don't remember how many were killed and how many were injured. I was devastated. I thought, children of 15 and 16 years old, you're the one that sends them out. If I learned anything from the battle here in Jerusalem, it was that never again would I be involved in a war like the War of Independence, a war for which we were unprepared. What made me remain in the army was the feeling that the people of Israel could not foresee what the future held. the Harel Brigade, a band of youngsters brought together by fate in the hills of Jerusalem, a group like there never had been and never would be again. Life was directed towards one goal, to have a state, to establish a state, a Jewish state. That was the goal. In the Galilee, the British move out of the regional capital, Safed. Fearing for the lives of the Jews, the British advised them to evacuate the town. About 10,000 Arabs against 2,000 Jews, religious families who had lived there for generations. Our order was, no one leaves Safed. Not the children, not the women, not the elderly. No one leaves. The British left, enabling the Arabs to seize strategic points, police stations, and the dominating buildings in the town. And then the Arab offensive began. For 14 hours, Safed is shelled. Shots, explosions, and cries of pain. A Phalmach unit camped on Mount Canaan dispatches 35 fighters to the Jews in Safed as a reinforcement. Going to Safed, says Alad Peled, was special because we weren't sure we'd be coming back. They infiltrate into the city under cover of darkness. They're heavily equipped and welcomed with joy as if they were a mighty army come to deliver the town. There was an ungodly silence in town, says Peled. Not a soul in sight except the Haganah people who welcomed us to their posts. You couldn't see a living soul. And when we started singing, I remember people emerged from the basements. We suddenly saw people in the windows. They started greeting us in Yiddish. God bless you, a blessing upon you. Against all odds, 35 Phalmach fighters and a few Haganah members hold out against larger Arab forces. Each day seems like an eternity. Attacks, shelling, and sniping. The situation worsens. This sector was of vital importance, and we held on to it with only 2 people, night after night. It could drive you crazy. The Yiftach Brigade is reorganized under the command of Yigal Alon. It moves from defense to an all-out offensive against the armies of Syria and Lebanon. The 3rd Battalion is assigned to the rescue of Safed. After a difficult and painful battle, the city is freed. In the south, the Phalmach's Negev Brigade is engaged in combat. 12 settlements try to hold out against the invading Egyptian army. On May 18th, Kibbutz Yad Mordechai comes under attack by the Egyptians. Situated near a highway, the kibbutz blocks their march towards Tel Aviv. The Egyptians deploy a full brigade supported by artillery and tanks. The kibbutz comes under heavy shelling. Children and women have to be evacuated the same night. I remember someone yanking at my arms in the middle of the night. I wanted to sleep, and someone was pulling me up. Wake up, wake up, wake up. I opened my eyes and I see that everyone is being awakened. There was candlelight or something, a very dim light. I see that everyone was being pulled up and told to get dressed quickly, and we left. It was a very tough journey. Many of the children cried. It was stifling and terribly crowded. For 5 days and nights, kibbutz fighters and members of the Negev Brigade hold out against superior Egyptian forces. They deplete the Egyptians' ranks and arrest their advance towards Tel Aviv. The fighters are finally forced to evacuate the kibbutz. The exhausted kibbutz forces are replenished by new immigrants, war refugees from Europe who have just arrived in the country. They have barely touched the soil of the new state of Israel when they are promptly recruited. From one war to another. Only now they are not victims, they are fighters. First of all, the orders were given in Hebrew, but nobody understood, so they all shouted Yiddish. That was Section A. In Section B, they were Moroccans. They shouted French. Section C from Tripoli shouted Italian. The routine morning orders had to be translated into 4 languages. With renewed vigor, Phalmach brigades reorganized to break through into the Negev to reach the besieged settlements. The problem I faced as the commander of the 7th Battalion was that, if I'm not mistaken, this was our 7th defeat, and the most crushing one. At this point, the problem was how to boost morale. And then, an unseen hand wrote, "Nevertheless and in spite of everything, Pälmach." And on the other wall, someone wrote, "The 7th Battalion will rise again." After heavy fighting all the way, Beersheba, the capital of the Negev, is conquered. From here, the road is open to the rest of the Negev and to Eilat. Operation Fact, the conquest of Eilat, is the last battle of the War of Independence. March 1949, under the command of Yigal Allon, 3 brigades take part in the fighting. I came up to the guys and said, "Eat quickly and then group in 3s. They said, "Who wants to eat? We're heading out." They sang as they formed up. Earlier they had been corpses, now they were singing and they raced down the slope. Then after searching the place, we decided to raise the flag. I had a camera, so I took a picture. "Look at them," wrote the author Samet Yizhar. "No real uniforms, no proper equipment, no burdens, no possessions. Children of nothing, children of no one. They roam with a spirit of adventure. How handsome they are, how heart-rendingly innocent. Perhaps they are the silver platter, to be buried under the sands of the Negev." What happened here wasn't just for the sake of another stone memorial. We fought for life, not death. That's why I'm here. The Pälmach Museum is an educational center consisting of exhibition spaces, archives, databases, and a memorial. It offers visitors a unique and emotional experience. The Pälmach is part of Israel's mythology. Soon after the beginning of historical research, it became apparent that alongside the battles and the legends, an additional aspect was important: the Pälmach spirit, an ideological and spiritual expression of devotion and comradeship. That spirit couldn't be captured by exhibiting a pistol in a glass showcase.
Army of the yet unborn state of Israel. The Pälmach Trail illustrates the landscapes in which the Pälmach operated. We shall accompany a platoon of young volunteers throughout a decade of their lives.
1,135 Pälmach members, almost 1/3 of the force, were killed during the War of Independence. Who were they? What motivated them? What were the conditions in which they operated? At the push of a button, our story begins. Our concept for the Pälmach Trail is based on the decision to create a theatrical experience on 2 parallel levels. One is a dramatic story whose heroes are fictional characters. The second is documentary, incorporating authentic materials. The scenic environment is not the real thing, but a stylish illustration. A black service ceiling conceals lights, projectors, and air conditioning ducts. In order to ease the visitor's orientation throughout the presentations of historical facts, dates, and events, a special tool was used, the newsreel. The newsreels are scattered at crossroads along the trail and provide the historical facts and background of the era. Each scene depicts an image of the original landscape or place where real events occurred, which are dramatized in the presentation. At the Eucalyptus Grove, we join a fictional platoon with a dozen characters representing typical Pälmach volunteers. Their images emerge from within the scenery and act within it. Our decision to portray history through personal stories led to the notion that our heroes should represent low-ranking soldiers, the ordinary people who make history.
אם כבר התחלנו להתוודע, בואו נעשה את זה מסודר. מי זה ארי אריכה?
אריק.
אהוד מנחמי?
אודי. שף.
It was decided that the dramatized story would reflect the details of the period as accurately as possible, dressing the actors in period clothes, creating dialogues in period slang, and using young actors like the real Palmach volunteers. The passage from one scene to the next is cued by light and sound effects. It's not only a passage in space, but in time. Each scene marks an entire year. Our actors